Up until now, we've used pipelines to run just one time only to copy data from one place to the other. But in reality, what normally happens is we create pipelines that run on a scheduled, regular basis. So let's take a look at how we can schedule a pipeline to run at regular intervals. So again, I'm going to do this in Visual Studio. You can do this in the web portal as well. But what I've got here is my connection to my Azure storage. If I take a look in my storage account here, I've got in my GStore storage account, I've got a blob container called ADF data. I just open that up. I have actually a folder here called game data. And the idea here is we've got an online game with regular data that's being generated by that. So it's a multiplayer game with status and score data being generated for each user. And the data is stored in a hierarchy of folders. So we start with the year, and then within each year we've got the months, and within each month we have a file for each day of the month. So you can see that I've got that data there ready to be transferred across, and it's set up in that structure that's determining the time, the temporal periods of when that data relates to. So I can go ahead and I'll just move back up to the root of that folder and go ahead and create a pipeline that's going to copy that data across. And I've already got the linked services in place. I've got my blob store for that location where that file is. And I've also created a data set for that daily game data here. So let's take a look at that data set. And you can see that it's the name of the data set is daily game data CSV. It has some columns of data in there. It's got a column called player of type string, a column called time of type string, and a column called points of type integer 32. And that's a data set that I'm going to use. It's an Azure blob data set. It's in that blob store linked service, so that's where the data set exists. And notice here that the folder path, it's in the ADF data container in a folder called game data. But then in these braces here, I've said year and month. So we've got placeholders there for the year and month. We're telling our pipeline, or we're telling our data set that there's a kind of placeholder variable here. We'll have the year, whatever the year is, and then whatever the month is, so that it can use that to track those temporal periods. And then the actual format of the file is whatever the day number is, CSV. So we've got the number of the day CSV. The file is a text format. It's comma delimited. The first row contains the header. And we're partitioning this by these placeholders. So we're partitioning it by year. And that's of type date time. That's the slice start. Each slice of data we're going to copy across is the date. The year that we're talking about here is based on the slice start when we started to copy the data. And the format is YYYY. It's a 4-digit date. And similarly, we've got month. And again, that's the format for month. So it's the numerical value of the month. And the day is the numerical value of the day, the 2Ds. So we use these temporal placeholders to give us that folder and file name for the data that we're going to copy across. And the availability of this source data is going to be updated on a daily basis. Every 1 day, we're going to update this, and we're going to tie that to that day value there. It's an external data set. In other words, it's generated externally from ADF. So ADF doesn't create this data. It's actually loaded into that folder by our online game. And then that's going to be copied across. Now, the other thing I've got here is my SQL database linked service that I used previously. And I've specified that there's a DBO points data set. This is the table in that database where I want to copy the points data across to. And again, we've got the structure of that table, player, time, and points. And the table name is dbo.points. And we're going to update that on a daily basis. So every day, we're going to take the new data that's appeared for the game data, and we're going to copy that across to the database. And if I actually take a look in that database, here's my data DB. We'll just create a new query here. And we're going to have a look at what's in that points table. So we'll select star from dbo.points. And you can see that I've got those columns there. I've got an ID column that's automatically generated. I've got player, time, and points. And there's no data currently in that table. So we haven't got any of that data over there. So that's our data, our source and our destination. We need a pipeline, obviously, to join these two things together. So here's my pipeline. And again, I get this graphical visualization of that appearing at the top. I'll just close that out of the way so we can focus on the JSON file here. And we've got a pipeline called copy daily game points. It has an activity in it called copy, and that activity has a source, which is a blob source, and it has a sink, which is a SQL sink. So in other words, it's reading from blob storage and writing to a SQL database. And it's doing that with a table where we're mapping the player column to the player column, the time column to the time column, the points column to the points column. So just what you would expect. The inputs, well, the input is our daily game data CSV table over here, that data set that defines our game data in the blob file. And our output is the DBO points data set, which defines the table in our SQL database. And we're going to do this. We've got a concurrency here of 5, so we're going to be setting that concurrency level just to effectively determine the degree of parallelism that's used when we copy the data across. And we're going to execute oldest first. So it's going to, because we're using data that's actually in the past, it's in 2016 and it's currently 2017, it's going to start copying that data retrospectively, the data that should have already been copied. It's going to start doing that, do the oldest data first, and then when it catches up to itself, if we have dates scheduled for the future, the pipeline will keep running and just wait for the new data to appear. And we're scheduling that to run every day, and we're naming that copy points data. And I've got a start date for the pipeline here, which is 2016-01, effectively at 0000 Zulu hours, which is the UTC time zone, and ending at the end of June in 2016. So I could actually specify that date to be sometime in the future, and the pipeline would just keep running. But in this case, I'm specifying that it ended on that particular date. So it's going to go and run, even though those dates in the past, it will go and run and catch itself up until it completes that complete date, those complete periods of time. And the pipeline mode is scheduled. Previously, we've had one time here. This one is scheduled, so it's going to run on that scheduled basis. Well, let's go ahead and deploy that pipeline. So we'll just go and publish. And we'll publish our existing Azure Data Factory. And we're not going to specify any additional configuration. We're not going to delete any of the existing objects that are up there. Just going to go ahead and deploy that. Just wait for that to upload all the various components and get the pipeline started. And off it goes. Everything's been uploaded. So we'll go ahead and finish there. And we can now, I'll just close that output window there so that we can see the rest of that window. And I'll go back to my browser. And here's my Azure Data Factory blade here. And I'm going to look at the monitor and manage section. Well, first of all, actually, I'll look at the pipelines. And I can see that actually that copy daily game points pipeline has been created there, and it's now running. So go and have a look at the monitor and manage section here. So that opens up a new pane. And I can see that I've got that copy daily game points pipeline listed here. Because it's a scheduled pipeline, it appears in here. I don't actually see any activity windows for that pipeline down underneath, and that's because I'm currently looking for this range of dates here from the 1st of January 2017 to the 13th of January 2017, and that's obviously much later than those activity windows that I've got specified, those slices of data that are specified in my pipeline. So go back to the beginning of 2016, go back in time here to the first. And we'll specify at 0000 hours, so the very beginning of the first. And we'll go to the end of June. So we'll just go and select June 30th at 11:59. And we'll apply that filter. And what I get now is I can see the activity windows that are within that period of time. And there's a whole bunch of activity windows here that relate to my copy daily game points pipeline. I can see there's a whole bunch of them that are waiting here. And I can actually filter on that status. I can go and filter on that status and have a look for ones that are ready. And currently there aren't any that are ready. So it's obviously just getting itself set up to run that pipeline. I could look at the ones that are waiting. And there's a whole bunch of them waiting. So I can use that filter to go and find various different types of data. I could look at ones that are currently in progress. And there are a few of them that are currently in progress. So we'll just clear that filter. We'll clear all the filters that are there. And if I just select any of these activity windows, I can see here in my activity window explorer window here, there's some orange squares. Now these indicate orange squares where we're waiting to run that particular time slice. So the ones in June at 2016, we're still waiting to run. But if I scroll back and go back to the beginning of January, I can actually see that we've completed some of those daily transfers, and we have some that are currently in progress. So the dark green ones are ones that have completed, and the kind of hatched green ones, the lighter green ones, are ones that are currently running. And if I actually go and have a look in my database, so we'll just go back to our database window here and run that query once again, I can actually see that that data has begun to be copied across. So it's updating the table in the database on that regular basis. So we've gone and we've started running those daily copies. It runs each of those slices of time, each of those daily copies, it runs as an activity window, and I can see that it's working its way through those scheduled copies.